Good morning, children, and welcome back to our class. Today we are going to continue with our Oxford Inc. English Reader Part A, Unit 1, Section 2, Uncle Ken by Ruskin Bond. But before moving ahead, let's do a recap of what we did in our previous video. Children, we read about Ruskin Bond's eccentric relative Uncle Ken, who, being the only son of his parents, has been pampered a lot throughout his life. That turned him into a lethargic and carefree person. Ken, though an adult of 40 years of age, doesn't bother to earn his living and rather enjoys the hospitality of his sisters, including the author's grandmother. Due to Uncle Ken's casual approach towards life, Ruskin's granny was always concerned about him and shares her worries with Ruskin. She feared that who will look after Ken when his sisters will settle abroad, and also how will he manage his life after her. So, keeping all this in mind, a question arises that he has to work whether he likes it or not. Ruskin and Granny then decided to look for a job for him, a job which he would love to do and stick to forever. Luckily, Uncle Ken, being a tennis player, was appointed by the Maharaja to teach his children on a salary of 200 rupees a month. The Maharaja inquired Ken in his interview that was he at Cambridge. Ken replied that he was at Oxford. Children, now come to page number 12 of your textbook and let's find out more about Uncle Ken and his new job. Page number 12. The Maharaja was impressed. An Oxford man who could play tennis was just the sort of tutor he wanted for his children. After hearing from Uncle Ken that he was at Oxford, the Maharaja was highly impressed, as according to him, this kind of a tutor would be the best for his children. When Uncle Ken told Granny about the interview, she said, "But you haven't been to Oxford, Ken. How could you deceive him like that?" "Of course I have been to Oxford. Don't you remember? I spent 2 years there with your brother Jim." "Yes, but you were helping him in his business in the town. You weren't at the university." Uncle Ken told Granny about his new job and the questions being put up by Maharaja. But Granny was shocked to hear the lie he told the Maharaja regarding him being at Oxford. Uncle Ken argued with Granny and considered himself to be right and told her that he did not deceive the Maharaja, for he had really been to Oxford and stayed there with Granny's brother Jim for 2 years and helped him out in his business. The Maharaja never asked me if I had been to the university. He asked me if I was at Cambridge, and I said no. I was at Oxford, which was perfectly true. He didn't ask me what I was doing at Oxford. What difference does it make? And he strolled off whistling. Underline the phrase strolled off and write the meaning in the book itself. To walk leisurely. To our surprise, Uncle Ken was a great success in his job, in the beginning anyway. In the beginning, Uncle Ken's job was quite a success, and he enjoys it, which was something really surprising for his family members. The Maharaja was such a poor tennis player that he was delighted to discover that there was someone who was even worse. So instead of becoming a doubles partner for the Maharaja, Uncle Ken became his favorite singles opponent. As long as he could keep losing to His Highness, Uncle Ken's job was safe. The Maharaja was poor at tennis, and so does Uncle Ken, which made the Maharaja happy. So instead of making Uncle Ken his doubles partner in a match, he cunningly made him his singles opponent. And hence, by doing so, the Maharaja always wins the match, and poor Uncle Ken, being a loser in this way, secures his job. Children, underline the word opponent and write the meaning: a person who plays against someone in a competition or a game. In between tennis matches and accompanying his employer on duck shoots, Uncle Ken squeezed in a few lessons for the children, teaching them reading, writing, and arithmetic. Sometimes he took me along so that I could tell him when he got his sums wrong. Uncle Ken wasn't very good at subtraction, although he could add fairly well. The Maharaja was not a concerned father, as instead of letting Uncle Ken teach his kids, he plays tennis with him, or either make him accompany him on his duck shoots. Uncle Ken too was not interested in his job to teach the children, and if he gets time in between the games, he quickly takes up reading, writing, and arithmetic lessons. But as a tutor, Uncle Ken himself knew nothing. He sometimes takes Ruskin along with him for help. The Maharaja's children were smaller than me. Uncle Ken would leave me with them, saying, "Just see that they do their sums properly." Ruskin and he would stroll off to the tennis courts, hands in his pockets, whistling tunelessly. The Maharaja's children were younger than Ruskin, so it becomes easy for Ruskin to teach them. Uncle Ken, finding no interest to teach, often asked Ruskin to keep a check on the sums which he gave the children to do, while he walks here and there, hands in his pockets, whistling aimlessly. Even if his pupils had different answers to the same sum, he would give both of them an encouraging pat, saying, "Excellent, excellent. I am glad to see both of you trying so hard. One of you is right and one of you is wrong. But as I don't want to discourage either of you, I won't say who's right and who's wrong." Uncle Ken, in order to hide his inefficiency to teach, sometimes gives an encouraging pat for two different answers to the same sum. When he himself is not sure of the answers, he smartly encourages the children by saying that in order not to dishearten any one of them, "I will not share the correct answer, as one of you might be right, the other must be wrong." And later on, he confirms the correct answer from Ruskin. Like this, his classes as well as his tennis matches were moving on swiftly. But afterwards, on the way home, he would ask me, "Which was the right answer, Ruskin?" Uncle Ken always maintained that he would never have lost his job if he hadn't beaten the Maharaja at tennis. Not that Uncle Ken had any intention of winning, but by playing occasional games with the Maharaja's secretaries and guests, his tennis had improved. And so, try as hard as he might to lose, he couldn't help winning a match against the employer. Uncle Ken was a declared loser in the match of tennis, as he has understood it very well that being a loser is beneficial for his job. His job would be secure in this way. Uncle Ken had no intentions ever of winning over the Maharaja, but by playing regular matches with his guests and secretaries, he unknowingly became a good player. And from here started the problem. No matter how hard he tries to lose the game, he fails to win the match against his opponent, the Maharaja. The Maharaja was furious. "Mr. Clerk," he said sternly, "I don't think you realize the importance of losing. We can't all win, you know. Where would the world be without losers?" I am terribly sorry, said Uncle Ken. It was just a fluke, Your Highness. The Maharaja was not ready to take his defeat and angrily hinted Ken about the benefits of being a loser in the match. Uncle Ken apologized and told him that it had happened by chance and unintentionally. Children, the meaning of the word fluke is an unexpected occurrence, a surprising piece of luck. The Maharaja accepted Uncle Ken's apologies, but a week later it happened again. Kenneth Clark won, and the Maharaja stormed off the court without saying a word. The following day, he turned up at lesson time. As usual, Uncle Ken and the children were engaged in a game of noughts and crosses. But Uncle Ken couldn't keep up his words longer, and just after a week the same happened. He again won the match, but this time the Maharaja, in great anger, left the court without uttering a word. The next day, when Uncle Ken was busy playing the game of noughts and crosses means a childish game in which two players try to complete a row of either three noughts or three crosses down alternatively in the spaces of a grid of 9 squares. So when he was busy playing the game of noughts and crosses with the Maharaja's children, the Maharaja came to him and informed him to discontinue his services from the coming day. We won't be requiring your services from tomorrow, Mr. Clerk. I have asked my secretary to give you a month's salary in lieu of notice. He was even ready to pay him a month's salary in place of notice. We won't be requiring your services any more. Uncle Ken came home with his hands in his pockets, whistling cheerfully. You were early, said Granny. They don't need me any more, said Uncle Ken. Oh, well, never mind. Come in and have your tea. Uncle Ken, without getting depressed, cheerfully came back home and told Granny that he has been dismissed from his job. The Granny was not at all upset to hear this. Granny must have known the job wouldn't last very long, and she wasn't one to nag. As she said later, at least he tried, and it lasted longer than most of his jobs, 2 months. The Granny was not at all upset to hear this, for she was happy that at least he had tried to do something. But this job surprisingly lasted longer for 2 months than any other job up till now. So this was all about Ruskin Bond's Uncle Ken. The exercises and question and answers will be shared in your class groups. That's all for today. Take care. Thank you.